History is not just about dates and battles. It is connected by invisible threads of emotion that span centuries. This video uncovers 24 unspoken bonds, the hidden emotional connections preserved across empires. We will explore how feelings of loyalty, love, and loss silently shaped the ancient world. You will discover a new way to see history, not as a list of events, but as a living tapestry of human connection that still echoes in our lives today. How did a shared grief between rivals prevent a war? What secret solidarity among slaves toppled kingdoms? By the end, you will see the past as a story of enduring human hearts. What emotion from the ancient world do you think still influences us the most? An unspoken bond is history's quietest, most powerful force. It is the invisible thread of shared feeling that connects people across the divides of culture, language, and even conflict. These are not the alliances written on parchment or the treaties etched in stone. They are the silent understandings, the mutual grief, the unvoiced respect that flowed beneath the surface of empires. Think of the collective sigh of a population enduring a long drought, a shared anxiety that crossed from peasant to noble, or the unspoken alliance between two rival rulers who, despite their public posturing, privately agreed to avoid a war that would bleed their nations dry. One of the clearest examples comes from the tense frontier between Rome and Persia. While their empires were officially rivals, the envoys who traveled between them often developed a profound personal respect. This mutual understanding, never recorded in any official document, frequently cooled tempers and averted larger battles. It was a bond built on shared experience, a recognition of the heavy burden of leadership. To find these connections, we must learn to read between the lines of history, to listen for the whispers of human emotion in the silence between the great events. This shift in perspective opens a door to a hidden world, and our first stop reveals a bond forged in the most unexpected of places. The silence after the fall of an empire is not truly silent. It is filled with a shared, heavy grief that connects the conquered. In the wake of the Aztec Empire's collapse, a profound and unspoken bond formed among the diverse peoples of Mesoamerica. These were tribes who had once been rivals, even enemies, united only by the force of Tenochtitlan's power. Yet when the Spanish toppled that great city, something unexpected happened. Their individual sorrows merged into a collective mourning, a deep and mutual understanding of loss that transcended old hatreds. This was not a formal alliance. It was a quiet solidarity born from shared trauma, a silent agreement that their world had been broken. This bond of collective sorrow became a powerful, hidden force for cultural survival. Publicly, these indigenous groups appeared to submit to their new rulers, but in secret, they preserved their identities through covert rituals and whispered oral traditions. A story told in one village would find its way to another, passed along with a look of understanding. A fragment of an old song, sung softly during a Spanish festival, would be recognized and remembered by someone from a completely different tribe. Their shared grief became the foundation for a hidden resistance, not of weapons but of memory. They found common ground not in victory, but in their mutual loss, realizing that what they had in common was more powerful than what had once divided them. This emotional connection reveals a profound historical truth. Empires, in their very act of conquest and collapse, can unintentionally weave together the very peoples they sought to subjugate. It demonstrates how human suffering, when shared, can forge bonds stronger than any political treaty. The story of these Mesoamerican tribes is a poignant first example of an unspoken bond, one that echoes far beyond their time and place. This theme of unity forged in adversity reappears in our next bond, which shifts from the grief of the conquered to a surprising and silent understanding between two of history's greatest rivals. Even the fiercest enemies can recognize a shared humanity. In the heat of the Crusades, a remarkable bond formed between two legendary adversaries, Sultan Saladin and King Richard the Lionheart. Officially, they were locked in a holy war, commanders of armies dedicated to each other's destruction. Yet beneath the clash of swords, a current of silent respect flowed between them. This was not friendship, but a profound, unspoken understanding between two warriors who recognized their own burdens reflected in the other. During the brutal siege of Acre, stories emerged of Saladin sending fresh fruit and snow to the ailing Richard, a gesture of chivalry that defied the logic of conflict. In return, when Richard's horse was killed beneath him, Saladin famously sent 2 new steeds as a replacement. These were not acts of strategic necessity, but of personal honor. Their prisoner exchanges were conducted with a degree of courtesy that surprised their contemporaries, often sparing lives that would have otherwise been lost. This mutual admiration created an invisible framework that reduced needless brutality. While their soldiers fought, the leaders maintained a line of communication that prevented the war from descending into pure savagery. This bond, never formalized in any treaty, directly influenced diplomatic outcomes, cooling tempers and opening avenues for negotiation that pure animosity would have closed. The chronicles of the time and the folk tales that followed carefully preserved these moments, not as signs of weakness, but as evidence of a higher code. This emotional connection between adversaries reveals a startling truth. Even in the heart of conflict, human recognition can bridge the deepest divides, subtly steering the course of history away from total ruin. This silent respect between rivals stands in stark contrast to the bonds we explore next, connections not forged in war, but in the quiet, deliberate acts of peace and cultural exchange. While kings and conquerors waged war, another kind of bond was being cemented in stone and mortar. The architects and builders of empires, from the laborers on the Great Wall of China to the engineers of Roman aqueducts, were bound by a shared, silent pride in their work. These were not the bonds of kings or soldiers, but of craftsmen who understood the weight of legacy they were helping to shoulder. An engineer in Rome, calculating the precise slope for an aqueduct to bring water to 1 million people, and a stonemason in China, fitting granite blocks to secure a border, would never meet. Yet they were part of the same unspoken fellowship, a connection built on dedication to a colossal task that would outlive them. This was not just about wages or orders. It was about the profound human need to create something lasting, to contribute to a story larger than oneself. The emotional imprint of their collective labor is embedded in the very stones we walk past today. When you stand before the soaring arches of a Roman aqueduct, you are not just seeing an ancient utility. You are witnessing the quiet pride of the surveyor who ensured its perfect alignment, the determination of the quarryman who cut its stone, and the shared hope of thousands who knew their names would be forgotten, but their work would endure. This sense of belonging and purpose, this emotional legacy, is what transformed these massive projects from mere constructions into the backbones of civilization. They are a testament to the idea that the most enduring connections are sometimes not between people, but between people and the future they are building together. This silent dialogue between creator and creation finds its echo in our next bond, where we see how artists and poets secretly preserved the soul of a people long after their empire had faded from memory. The world's first globalization was not born in a palace or on a battlefield. but on the dusty tracks of the Silk Road. Here, a different kind of empire was built, one woven from unspoken alliances between merchants who shared no common language or law. A Chinese silk trader and a Persian caravan leader, meeting in a bustling Samarkand market, operated on a foundation of pure, earned trust. There were no formal contracts that could protect them from bandits or sandstorms. Their bond was a silent agreement, a mutual understanding forged in the shared risks of a months-long journey across the world's most treacherous terrain. This camaraderie was the true currency of the Silk Road, more valuable than any spice or jewel. It was an emotional network that allowed a tired trader to leave his goods in the care of a near stranger, confident they would be safeguarded. It was the unspoken rule that offered shelter and food to a rival caravan caught in a blizzard, recognizing a shared vulnerability. These acts of quiet solidarity did more than move merchandise, they silently transferred the very fabric of civilization. A new musical scale could travel from a campfire in Persia to a courtyard in Chang'an. A design for a water wheel sketched in the dust could be carried across continents. This was a global connectivity powered by human emotion, by the simple, profound need to rely on one another. The trust these merchants placed in strangers created an invisible web of emotional support that stretched for thousands of miles, proving that the most resilient connections are often those never officially declared. This silent, practical faith found on the trade routes echoes the deeper, spiritual bonds that formed in the sacred spaces of the ancient world. In the crowded streets of Jerusalem, a different silence spoke volumes. Amidst the clash of empires and faiths, pilgrims from across the world found themselves drawn to the same sacred stones. A Christian monk, a Muslim scholar, and a Jewish elder, each following their own divine path, would often find their journeys intersecting in the city's holy places. Their doctrines were different, their rituals distinct, yet in these moments a profound and unspoken kinship emerged. It was a bond built not on shared belief, but on shared reverence. They recognized the same look of devotion in each other's eyes, the same quiet humility before something greater than themselves. This silent understanding allowed for small, profound acts of peace. A Muslim guard might quietly ensure a group of Christian pilgrims had safe passage to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A Jewish family might offer water to a weary Muslim traveler praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque courtyard. These were not grand gestures recorded in chronicles, but quiet moments of empathy that softened the hard edges of conflict. They created hidden pockets of harmony where cultural exchange could quietly flourish. A healer from one tradition might share a remedy with a healer from another, their common goal of alleviating suffering transcending religious law. This spiritual kinship demonstrates that the human heart, in its search for meaning, can forge connections that official theology cannot. It reveals how sacred spaces, often points of contention, could also become neutral ground where the universal language of faith whispered of a deeper unity. This bond among the devout shows that even the most divided empires could not fully extinguish the embers of mutual respect that glowed in their most holy places. From these lofty realms of spirit, our journey now descends into the vibrant, chaotic heart of the ancient city, where a different, more practical bond thrived in the daily lives of ordinary people. A shared glance across a crowded marketplace could carry a world of meaning for a slave in ancient Rome. Within the brutal machinery of empire, where human beings were treated as property, an invisible network of silent support flourished. These were the bonds of solidarity among the enslaved, a profound emotional connection forged in the crucible of shared suffering. It was a language spoken not with words, but through subtle acts of defiance and compassion. A kitchen slave might deliberately burn a meal for a cruel master, while a field hand would leave a portion of his meager water ration for a fellow laborer on the verge of collapse. These were not random acts. They were a coordinated, though unspoken, system of mutual aid that preserved dignity and sanity. Songs sung while working in the fields often contained hidden messages, their rhythms and coded lyrics mapping out escape routes or signaling the arrival of a sympathetic contact. This emotional network provided the psychological sustenance needed to endure the unendurable, creating a secret society within the empire's underbelly. This collective sense of injustice could not remain hidden forever. It eventually erupted into open rebellion, most famously during the Servile Wars. Led by the gladiator Spartacus, this was not merely an army of escaped slaves. It was the physical manifestation of that long-suppressed emotional bond, a collective roar against a system that denied their humanity. Their solidarity, nurtured in silence, became the very engine of their revolt, proving that the most potent resistance is often born from a shared, unspoken understanding. The power of this bond demonstrates a universal truth that even under the most oppressive conditions, the human spirit will find a way to connect, to support, and ultimately, to challenge the forces that seek to break it. This theme of connection forged in hardship echoes powerfully in the experiences of those forcibly removed from their homes, a bond we will soon explore. An emperor in exile is a king without a kingdom, yet his emotional grip on a distant homeland can remain unbreakable. From Napoleon Bonaparte gazing out from the island of Elba to the last Byzantine emperors watching their world shrink from a foreign court, these deposed rulers were physically removed but emotionally tethered. Their unspoken bond with the people and land they left behind was woven from threads of potent nostalgia and unresolved loyalty, creating a lingering presence that haunted the new political order. Followers who had never met their exiled leader would secretly hoist a flag, sing an old song, or preserve a fragment of a royal standard, all acts fueled by this shared, silent hope. The physical absence of the ruler paradoxically amplified their emotional presence, transforming them into a symbol rather than a person. This phenomenon reveals a powerful historical truth that the heart of a nation can beat in a single, distant heart. The emotional ties of exile proved that legitimacy was not just a matter of law and land, but of memory and longing. A government could seize a throne, but it could not so easily seize the collective imagination of a people who still felt connected to their exiled sovereign. This invisible network of hope and loyalty often inspired passive resistance, covert networks of support, and a stubborn cultural resilience that frustrated conquerors for generations. It demonstrates how a bond stretched across sea and desert could be more politically potent than any standing army. The lingering emotional presence of these exiled figures, their silent pull on the hearts of their people, shows that the most formidable empires are sometimes challenged not by force but by a feeling. This profound connection between a displaced leader and a remembering people finds a surprising parallel in the silent, enduring language of art, where emotions are captured not in decrees but in pigment and poetry. A Mughal miniature depicting a lover's sorrow and a Renaissance portrait of a scholar contemplating a skull, though worlds apart, were engaged in a silent conversation. These artists, living under vastly different empires, were exploring the same profound emotions, love, loss, and the fleeting nature of life. They were bound by an unspoken dialogue, one that bypassed official court histories and diplomatic spats. A Persian painter, delicately rendering the anguish of separation in a poetic scene, was speaking the same emotional language as an Italian master using shadow to convey the weight of mortality. This was not a coincidence but evidence of a shared human heart. Viewers from any culture could look upon these works and feel a pang of recognition. a connection to the universal experiences they portrayed. This silent exchange of feeling allowed for a subtle but powerful cross-pollination of ideas. The use of color to evoke mood, the composition of a scene to tell a story, even the very way an artist captured a tear, these techniques and emotional insights traveled along the same trade routes as spices and silk. This bond in art demonstrates that while empires built walls, artists were quietly building bridges, proving that a feeling beautifully expressed in one land could find a home in the heart of another. This remarkable ability of human emotion to transcend political boundaries finds an equally powerful expression in the shared curiosity that connected the great scientific minds of the ancient world. A shared question about the stars could connect two minds 1,000 years apart. In the bustling libraries of Baghdad and the quiet monasteries of medieval Europe, a silent partnership was forming among scholars who would never meet. A Persian polymath like Avicenna, writing a groundbreaking medical text in the 10th century, was unknowingly reaching out a hand to a future thinker in Padua or Paris. This was the unspoken bond of shared curiosity, an intellectual camaraderie that transcended the rigid boundaries of empires and faiths. Their connection was woven through fragile manuscripts, carefully translated from Arabic to Latin, passing through the hands of scribes in Toledo and Sicily. These texts were not just carriers of information, they were vessels of emotion carrying the author's passion, their relentless questioning, and their awe at the complexity of the natural world. When a European scholar first read Avicenna's canon of medicine, he was not just learning new remedies, he was feeling the weight of the same intellectual burden, the same burning desire to heal that had driven the Persian master centuries before. This created a profound, silent respect, a recognition of a kindred spirit across the chasms of time and culture. Their mutual pursuit of truth built an invisible network of collaboration that fueled the Renaissance. The astronomical tables developed by Islamic scholars, mapping the heavens with stunning accuracy, were not merely copied by Europeans. They were understood, expanded upon, and revered as the work of fellow travelers on the same great journey. This emotional connection highlights a stunning truth that the love of knowledge can forge bonds more durable than any political alliance. It demonstrates how a single idea, passed from mind to mind, can become an empire of thought in itself, quietly shaping the future while kings and caliphs waged war. This silent fellowship of the curious, dedicated to a truth greater than any single empire, stands in stark contrast to the bonds we find in the disciplined ranks of ancient armies. A soldier's loyalty is not always pledged to a flag or a homeland. For the Varangian Guard, the elite Norse mercenaries who served as the personal protectors of the Byzantine emperor, allegiance was a more personal matter. These towering warriors from the north found themselves in the glittering, complex heart of a civilization utterly alien to their own. They could not speak the language, they did not share the faith, and they were separated by a vast cultural chasm from the people they were sworn to defend. Yet within this unlikely arrangement, a powerful, unspoken camaraderie took root. It was a bond forged not in shared history, but in shared danger and an unshakable professional code. Day after day, they stood shoulder to shoulder, their axes a silent promise between the emperor and his throne. This daily proximity, this mutual reliance in life or death situations, bred a profound respect that transcended the simple transaction of pay for service. The emotional connection these foreign fighters developed for their adopted home was so strong that they became its most ferocious defenders. History records their unwavering loyalty during palace coups and city riots, where their foreignness became their greatest strength, having no local ties or political ambitions beyond the protection of the ruler they served. This tacit brotherhood reveals a stunning truth about human connection. Identity is not always about where you are from, but about who you stand with. A shared purpose and mutual respect can build a bridge across any cultural divide, creating a new kind of family bound by oath and honor. The fierce protectiveness of the Varangian guard for a civilization they were not born into shows that the heart's allegiance can be chosen, and that the most powerful loyalties are sometimes those we forge for ourselves. This exploration of chosen family within the military structure naturally leads us to consider the bonds of blood and the far more complicated emotional ties that held royal families together or tragically tore them apart. A royal marriage was a transaction, a living treaty signed with a human life. Yet within these gilded cages, something unexpected often bloomed. The most carefully arranged political match, designed to merge empires and secure borders, could be quietly undermined by a simple, unspoken affection between husband and wife. Consider the union between the French Bourbon and Spanish Habsburg dynasties, a marriage intended to end decades of war. While courts and councils saw only a strategic alliance, the young princess and her foreign prince sometimes discovered a shared loneliness, a mutual confusion in their new roles. This private bond, a fragile thread of personal understanding, could become a powerful, hidden force in statecraft. A queen, trusted by her king, might whisper a plea for restraint during a diplomatic crisis, her words carrying the weight of a genuine emotional connection that no official ambassador could ever replicate. This subtle influence did not change grand strategy, but it could soften its edges, turning a potential declaration of war into a tense negotiation, or a trade embargo into a minor tariff. These private affections created a buffer between empires, a personal stake in peace that transcended the cold logic of power. It reveals that the grand narrative of history was often being gently nudged in the quiet of a royal bedchamber, where two people, pawns in a vast political game, found a common humanity that, in its own small way, helped hold the world together. From these gilded halls of power, we now turn to the bonds that formed in the dust of the common road, where the shared experience of the journey created a different kind of empire, one built on movement and mutual reliance. The roar of the crowd in the Colosseum was a single, shared heartbeat. Across sprawling empires, from the chariot races of Rome to the lantern-lit festivals of the Chinese New Year, massive public celebrations created a powerful, if temporary, emotional unity. For a few days, the rigid social hierarchies and deep ethnic divisions that structured daily life simply melted away. A Roman senator and a freed slave, both clad in white for the ludi, would stand shoulder to shoulder, their voices joining in a collective gasp as the gladiators entered the arena. In the Tang dynasty capital, a noble family and a group of traveling merchants from the Silk Road would mingle in the streets, their faces illuminated by the same floating lanterns, their laughter merging into one joyous sound. This was not a bond decreed by any emperor, but one born from the spontaneous, shared experience of pure, unadulterated joy. In these moments, people were not defined by their station or origin, but by their common humanity, by the universal feelings of happiness, pride, and wonder. This collective effervescence forged an unspoken agreement, a silent understanding that despite their differences, they were all part of something larger. The memory of that shared euphoria became a kind of emotional glue, reinforcing a sense of imperial identity that official propaganda could never achieve on its own. It illustrated a profound truth that the bonds which truly hold a society together are often woven in moments of collective celebration, not just in times of collective crisis. This theme of connection through shared experience, of finding unity in movement and celebration, flows directly into the next powerful bond, one formed not in a single place, but across the vast, lonely trails of human migration. A Phoenician merchant in Carthage, thousands of miles from the cedar-covered mountains of his homeland, could close his eyes and be transported by the scent of a particular spice or the rhythm of a familiar song. Scattered communities like the Phoenicians and the Jewish diaspora carried their homelands within them, not as maps or political borders, but as a living, breathing, emotional landscape. This unspoken bond with a distant past and place was their true anchor in a world of foreign empires. They maintained this connection through the quiet consistency of daily ritual, the shared stories told and retold, and the subtle flavors of traditional foods prepared for generations. In the bustling port of Alexandria or the Forum of Rome, these practices were not just cultural artifacts, they were acts of emotional preservation, a silent declaration that their identity was portable and eternal. This network provided a profound sense of continuity and a hidden support system. A Jewish artisan new to a city could find immediate kinship and practical aid from a community bound by this shared emotional heritage. This resilience allowed them to not just survive, but to profoundly influence their host societies. The Phoenician alphabet, carried by these emotional networks, became the foundation for scripts across the Mediterranean. The philosophical and scientific ideas preserved and advanced by Jewish scholars in diaspora enriched the intellectual life of every empire they touched. Their story reveals a powerful truth that the most enduring connections can be those stretched across vast distances, woven from memory and feeling. This profound emotional resilience, the ability to maintain a sense of self while adapting to new lands, finds a startling parallel in our next bond, where entire populations, regardless of origin or status, were united by a shared vulnerability to the raw power of the natural world. A plague does not recognize the borders on a map. When the Justinian plague swept across the Mediterranean world, it struck the Byzantine and Sasanian empires with indiscriminate fury, reducing their grand political rivalry to a shared struggle for survival. In this atmosphere of collective dread, an unspoken bond of mutual aid quietly took root, connecting ordinary people who were officially enemies. As cities quarantined and trade routes fell silent, a different kind of exchange began. A Byzantine farmer who discovered a herb that seemed to ease a fever would share that knowledge with a traveling merchant who would carry it across the contested frontier. A Persian doctor, risking his own safety, might treat a group of sick Roman travelers left stranded at a border post, his oath to heal transcending any imperial allegiance. These were not acts of high diplomacy, but of basic human compassion, a silent pact forged in the face of a common, invisible enemy. This shared resilience created a hidden network of empathy that temporarily overrode generations of hostility. The emotional landscape shifted from us versus them to the afflicted versus the disease. This bond reveals a profound truth about our nature, that when faced with existential threats, our instinct to help one another can become the most powerful force, quietly mending the very divisions that empires worked so hard to build. This demonstration of innate human solidarity in the darkest of hours finds a deliberate echo in the next bond, where great minds across the ancient world consciously sought to articulate the very principles of such universal connection. Two minds separated by vast continents and centuries arrived at the same profound conclusion. In the bustling city-states of ancient Greece, Aristotle was teaching that a life of virtue was the path to true happiness, while in the warring states of ancient China, Confucius was articulating his own very similar vision of moral character as the foundation of a harmonious society. They never met, they had no knowledge of each other's work, and yet they were engaged in a silent, parallel conversation about the fundamental questions of human existence. This is the unspoken bond of philosophical alignment, a connection woven from the universal threads of human reason. Both men looked at their respective worlds, filled with conflict and chaos, and independently identified the same cure: a life guided by ethics, self-discipline, and a deep sense of responsibility to one's community. For Aristotle, this was the golden mean, the cultivation of balanced character traits between dangerous extremes. For Confucius, it was the concept of ren, or humaneness, a compassionate virtue cultivated through righteous relationships. Their shared focus was not on grand cosmic theories, but on the practical matter of how to live a good life within a complex society. This remarkable convergence suggests something stunning about our shared humanity. It implies that the emotional and intellectual yearning for order, meaning, and moral clarity is not a cultural invention, but a fundamental part of the human condition. These parallel ideas created an invisible intellectual bridge, a testament to the fact that the human heart and mind, when confronted with similar social challenges, can arrive at strikingly similar solutions. This silent dialogue between distant thinkers reveals that the deepest connections can exist entirely in the realm of ideas, waiting to be discovered. As we uncover these alignments, we are naturally drawn to the very medium that carries them, the powerful and often hidden bonds preserved within the words we speak. A shared language is more than a collection of words for trade or commands. It is a vessel for the unspoken, a current of shared feeling that flows beneath the surface of official business. Across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, from the sun-baked markets of North Africa to the misty garrisons of Britannia, Latin served as this kind of emotional conduit. A Roman centurion stationed in a foreign land, writing a letter home using the familiar grammar and vocabulary of his upbringing, was doing more than communicating. He was pouring his loneliness, his longing, and his pride into a structure that any other Latin speaker, regardless of their origin, would instinctively understand. The language itself carried the emotional weight of his experience. Similarly, Koine Greek woven through the administrative fabric of the Hellenistic world and the early Roman East allowed a Greek merchant and an Egyptian scribe to share not just a price, but a joke, a moment of commiseration about the heat, or a quiet word of advice. These exchanges built a foundation of mutual recognition that went far beyond the transaction at hand. The subtle rhythms, the proverbs, the very cadence of a shared lingua franca created a space for empathy to grow. It allowed people to sense hesitation in a partner's voice or recognize sincerity in a promise, nuances that would be lost in a clumsy translation through an interpreter. This was the silent power of a common tongue. It built a hidden latticework of emotional understanding across immense cultural divides, turning strangers into collaborators and making the sprawling, impersonal machinery of an empire feel just a little more human. This unspoken bond, forged in the daily music of a shared language, finds a direct and flavorful parallel in the universal experience of a shared meal. A shared meal can silence the loudest political disagreements. In the bustling caravanserais along the Silk Road, a Persian merchant and a Chinese official might not have spoken the same language, but they could break bread together. The simple act of sharing food, of savoring the same complex spices, created an unspoken kinship that bypassed diplomacy. When Indian pepper or cinnamon from Ceylon first arrived in a Roman kitchen, it did more than flavor a patrician's feast. It carried with it the scent of distant monsoon rains and the memory of the hands that harvested it, creating a silent, sensory bridge between the consumer and a world they would never see. This was not merely trade, it was a quiet conversation conducted through taste. The slow, deliberate ritual of preparing and drinking tea, a custom Britain adopted from China, is a perfect example. This was not just about importing a commodity, it was about absorbing an emotional practice. The warmth of the cup, the quiet pause in the day, the shared experience of comfort, these feelings transcended the vast cultural chasm between a London clerk and a Beijing scholar. They were both participating in the same soothing ceremony, a silent bond of ritual that connected their daily lives. Food became a living memory, a way for displaced peoples to carry their homelands with them. A family in the Armenian diaspora preparing a traditional dish with spices now bought in a Roman market was not just cooking, they were quietly reaffirming their identity and preserving an emotional link to their ancestors. This culinary empathy, this shared language of flavor and nourishment, demonstrates that some of the most resilient connections are forged not in treaty halls, but around the hearth and the table. These sensory bonds of taste and smell naturally find their rhythm in the next universal language, the movement and music that stirs the human soul across every empire. The raw cry of a flamenco singer cuts through the air, a sound woven from centuries of Moorish lament, Jewish prayer, and Romani resilience. This is not just music, it is a living archive of unspoken feelings, a bond forged in the shared crucible of Spanish history. When a dancer's heels strike the floor in a furious rhythm, they are not merely performing, they are channeling the collective sorrow and defiant joy of peoples who were often pushed to the margins. Flamenco became a secret language, a way to express grief, passion, and resistance that would have been too dangerous to speak aloud. The intricate hand claps and mournful guitar melodies created a space where different cultures could meet not through debate, but through a shared, pounding heartbeat. This emotional vocabulary transcended the political boundaries of empires, carrying its powerful resonance across the Mediterranean and beyond. A similar phenomenon occurred with the drumming traditions of West Africa, whose complex polyrhythms, born from specific communities, traveled across the Atlantic on slave ships. Those rhythms became the unspoken bond that connected enslaved people from different tribes and languages, a hidden emotional network preserved in music that would later birth blues, jazz, and soul. This universal language of rhythm and melody proves that some of our deepest connections are not stored in libraries, but in the very movements of our bodies and the songs we cannot help but sing. These artistic bonds, preserved and passed down through generations, create an emotional inheritance that is felt long before it is ever understood. The instinct to express joy through movement or sorrow through song is a thread that connects all humanity, a silent agreement that some feelings are too vast for any single empire to contain. This profound transmission of feeling from one generation to the next finds its purest expression in the universal experiences of childhood, where the simplest of games can create bonds that empires strive their entire lives to build. A child's laughter needs no translation. In the bustling, sun-drenched port of Alexandria, where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and Roman cultures collided, the city's youngest inhabitants were weaving an empire of their own. While their parents navigated the complex rules of trade and social hierarchy, children formed unspoken bonds in the dust of the streets, their shared games and imaginary worlds effortlessly bridging the deepest ethnic divides. A Greek merchant's son and an Egyptian scribe's daughter, who would never be permitted to marry as adults, could be the closest of companions, building sandcastles together by the harbor or chasing the same stray cat through an alley. Their friendship was built on a silent language of play, a mutual understanding that transcended the prejudices being taught in their homes. These early emotional connections, though almost never recorded in any official history, planted seeds of lifelong empathy. The Greek boy who grew up to take over his father's business would carry with him the memory of his Egyptian friend's kindness, perhaps leading him to deal more fairly with a foreign partner years later. The shared stories and secret hideouts of a multicultural childhood created an invisible foundation for a more tolerant society. proving that the heart's first alliances can quietly dismantle the walls that empires build. This profound capacity for connection in youth finds a powerful echo at the other end of life, where the unspoken bonds of shared memory and aging reveal a different but equally universal thread in the human tapestry. The voice of an elder is a bridge across centuries, a living link to the laughter and tears of ancestors long gone. In every empire, from the tribal councils of the Gauls to the village squares of the Han dynasty, elders served as the guardians of an emotional inheritance. They were not merely repositories of facts, but the heart's archivists, preserving the feelings embedded within their people's history. A grandmother in a Mesopotamian village recounting a tale of a great flood was not just describing an event, she was transmitting the collective fear, the desperate hope, and the profound relief of survival that her own grandmother had felt. A storyteller in the Andes, sharing the epic of a mountain spirit, was passing down a sense of sacred wonder and a deep, emotional connection to the land. These narratives, shared in the flickering firelight, created an unspoken bond between a wide-eyed child and the countless generations who had sat in that same circle before them. The child learned the sting of betrayal from a fable, the warmth of loyalty from a hero's journey, and the weight of loss from a lament for a fallen king. This was not formal education, but the slow, steady weaving of a shared emotional fabric. This oral tradition provided a remarkable resilience. When empires rose and fell, when political systems crumbled and new rulers imposed their laws, these stories remained. They were the emotional bedrock upon which a culture could rebuild, because the feelings they preserved, the values they championed, were far more durable than any edict from a distant capital. The elder storyteller ensured that the soul of a people could not be conquered, because it lived in the breath between their words and the listening hearts of the young. This profound act of remembering, of holding the past close as an emotional guide, prepares us to confront history's most universal and silent bond, the shared rituals that honor those who are no longer here. The rituals of death speak a language understood by every human heart. From the grand pyramids of Egypt to the burning longboats of the Vikings, the way cultures care for their dead reveals a profound, unspoken bond. The Egyptians, with their meticulous mummification and elaborate tombs, were not just preserving a body, they were expressing a universal human terror, the fear of oblivion, and a fervent hope for a life beyond this one. A Viking chieftain sent to sea on a flaming ship was not merely being disposed of. His people were staging a spectacular farewell, a public declaration of love and loss that echoed the same grief felt by an Egyptian family placing offerings in a tomb. Though their methods were worlds apart, the underlying emotions were identical, a deep sorrow paired with a stubborn belief that a person's essence must be honored and protected. This shared vocabulary of grief allowed for moments of quiet recognition between even the most distant peoples. A Roman soldier stationed in Gaul might witness a local Celtic burial rite, and despite finding the custom strange, feel a pang of familiarity at the sight of a family's tears. The specific gods and rituals differed, but the raw emotion of parting was a universal constant. These practices created a silent agreement across empires that to be human is to mourn, and to remember is to defy the finality of death itself. This collective confrontation with mortality, this bond forged in our most vulnerable moment, reveals a startling unity. It is a reminder that beneath the armor of empire and the banners of culture, we all face the same silent horizon. And it is often from this shared understanding of life's fragility that the next powerful bond emerges, the unspoken solidarity that fuels rebellion against the very empires that sought to rule them. A shared desire for freedom can silence 1,000-old arguments. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was not a single, organized movement, but a spontaneous eruption of defiance from soldiers, peasants, and princes alike. These were groups separated by caste, religion, and regional loyalty, who had often viewed each other with suspicion or even hostility under the British East India Company's rule. Yet in that pivotal moment, a powerful, unspoken bond of collective anger and shared hope fused them together. The spark was a rumor about rifle cartridges, but the fuel was a deep, emotional current of resentment against foreign domination that every group felt in their own way. A Hindu sepoy and a Muslim landowner who might never have broken bread together in peacetime found themselves fighting side by side, their differences momentarily erased by a greater common cause. This was not a bond of detailed planning, but of shared feeling, a silent agreement that the enemy of their freedom was a singular force. This emotional unity enabled a level of coordination that baffled their British opponents, who expected their divide and rule tactics to keep the population fractured. Villagers passed messages to rebels without a word being spoken, using prearranged signals like an overturned pot or a specific knot in a cloth. The shared hope for a different future created an invisible network of trust that allowed for swift, surprising actions across a vast territory. The rebellion, though ultimately suppressed, demonstrated with stunning clarity that the most potent catalyst for historical change is not always a brilliant strategy, but a collective emotional state, a unified heart beating against oppression. This profound capacity for unity in the face of a common foe reveals a parallel truth that the same human heart capable of such fierce rebellion also holds the power for profound reconciliation, a bond we will find in the quiet, patient work of peacemakers. The most important words in a peace treaty are the ones never written down. Behind the grand pronouncements and inked seals of agreements like the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the devastating 30 Years' War, a different kind of negotiation was taking place. It happened in quiet corridors and over shared meals where the official envoys representing warring states discovered a shared exhaustion with the conflict. This was not a betrayal of their duties, but a vital human connection that made their official work possible. The French diplomat and his Habsburg counterpart, who had spent months publicly posturing, might find a moment of private understanding, a mutual recognition of the immense suffering their nations had endured. This unspoken empathy became the true foundation for the written terms. It allowed for small, crucial concessions that pride would have otherwise forbidden. A disputed border village might be ceded not because of strategic logic, but because one envoy, sensing the profound personal attachment of the other, quietly suggested it. The trust built from these tacit understandings ensured the treaty was not just a temporary ceasefire, but a framework that could last. The legal clauses defined the peace, but it was the human rapport that made it durable, creating a silent agreement to interpret the text in good faith. This emotional dimension of diplomacy reveals that the stability of nations can hinge on a shared glance of understanding between two tired men in a candlelit room. It proves that the heart has its own reasons of state, and that the bonds of mutual respect can be as crucial to peace as any army or alliance. This quiet power of personal connection in shaping our world sets the stage for our final exploration of these unspoken bonds. The stones of Machu Picchu do not speak, yet they tell every visitor the same silent story of ambition and mystery. We are the inheritors of these unspoken bonds, and their emotional legacy is embedded in our modern world, preserved in the global heritage we collectively cherish. When a traveler from Japan stands before the Parthenon in Greece, or a student from Brazil walks the Great Wall of China, they are not just tourists observing ruins. They are participants in a timeless emotional exchange, feeling the same awe and humility that the original builders hoped to inspire. This shared wonder creates a new, silent bond among people of all nationalities, a universal appreciation for human achievement that transcends modern borders. Organizations like UNESCO understand this profound connection intuitively. Their work in protecting these sites is not merely an archaeological endeavor, it is the preservation of humanity's emotional milestones. These places are physical anchors for the feelings we have explored, from the collective pride of builders to the shared grief of the conquered. By safeguarding them, we maintain a bridge to the hearts of the past, ensuring that the longing, the loyalty, and the love that shaped empires are not forgotten. This enduring legacy proves that these 24 bonds are far more than historical footnotes. They are active, living forces in our global culture. They remind us that while empires rise and fall, the invisible threads of human emotion they wove continue to connect us, creating a tapestry of shared experience that is, ultimately, the true heritage of our world. These unspoken bonds, woven across 24 different stories, share a powerful common thread. They almost always emerge in moments of shared crisis or profound transition, from the terror of a plague to the grief of conquest. They consistently transcend the barriers of language and culture, proving that a shared glance can carry more meaning than a formal treaty. And at their core, they are all built upon the universal bedrock of human emotion, the same love, fear, and hope that beat within every human heart, regardless of the empire they called home. This recurring pattern reveals a stunning truth. The grand empires of history, for all their walls and wars, were never truly isolated. They were invisibly, inextricably interconnected by the fundamental experiences of the people living within them. A mother in Rome feared for her son sent to the frontier with the same fierce intensity as a mother in Parthia. A farmer in Han China hoped for rain with the same desperate longing as a farmer in the Mayan highlands. Recognizing these patterns transforms our understanding of the past. History ceases to be a dry list of isolated events, of battles and successions confined to one corner of the map. Instead, it becomes a rich, shared human journey, a single, sprawling story of how people have always found ways to connect, to support one another, and to preserve their humanity against the immense forces that sought to divide them. This perspective does more than just illuminate the past, it invites us to look differently at our own world. The same emotional currents that flowed through ancient markets and sacred spaces are still flowing today. The silent understanding between rivals, the quiet solidarity among colleagues, the shared hope of a community facing a challenge, these are the modern echoes of the bonds that shaped empires. By learning to see these patterns in history, we become better at recognizing and nurturing the profound, unspoken connections that quietly hold our own world together. Our journey through these 24 unspoken bonds reveals a history not of stone and steel, but of feeling and connection. These silent threads of shared grief, secret respect, and quiet solidarity have shaped our world in ways that grand narratives often overlook. They remind us that beneath the armor of empire and the banners of culture, a common humanity has always pulsed, connecting us across the vast divides of time and geography. This perspective invites a powerful reflection. Look into your own heritage, into the stories passed down through your family or community. You will likely find similar emotional legacies, quiet understandings, or shared hopes that have been preserved across generations. Recognizing these patterns in the past can profoundly change how we see our present. It fosters a deeper empathy, allowing us to perceive the unspoken bonds that quietly unite our own modern world, the shared anxieties and collective hopes that transcend our contemporary divisions. If this exploration into the heart of history has resonated with you, If it has offered a new way to listen to the whispers of the past, please share your thoughts on these unspoken bonds in the comments below. Your perspective adds another thread to this ever-growing tapestry. And if you are eager for more journeys into the hidden corners of our story, consider subscribing for further deep dives into the mysteries that connect